Okay.
Now?
Yeah, it's all you.
Okay, this is a trip that we took in about 1960. There was four of us went on it. The Richmonds in a 24 Model T, Art and Martha and Teddy, and they went in. We went in our 13 Model T and Arnold. Right at this moment went in a 24 or 3 Maxwell that had never been driven since we restored it. It was had no bug. We had all kinds of bugs in it probably, but we never had even driven it. I don't think more than 3 miles when we took out off on a 1,750 mile trip. This particular deal was on Jacob's Ladder, I think, out in western part of Massachusetts. When I hit one of the cars wouldn't make the hill, and they were draining water out of my car, which is a 13 Ford, to put into another one that didn't have gas enough to go up the hill. It wasn't out of gas, but the hills, they're all gravity fed, all except the Maxwell. So Art was draining out of it. That's what it was. He drained it into a coffee can to put in his car so he could get up the hill to get more mileage, more gasoline in it, by somewhere along the other side of the Jacob's Ladder Hills out in the western part of Mass. Now I can't tell you what that would be. All that pumping a tire up, I can see that. We couldn't buy new tires in those days for anything but a Model T. And we were running tires that were new, old stock, but you never know what you're going to get. The first city we went across Massachusetts on Route 20. This was Albany, New York. I think it was a Sunday morning, and we went through Albany and right through Albany all the way to Buffalo on that same dual highway. The Model B Ford is a 4-cylinder Ford, 32, about 40 horse. The Maxwell is a 4-cylinder, about 30, maybe 32 or 3 horse. And both Model Ts are 4 cylinders, but they're 20 horse. So you see, we were somewhat underpowered for these hills because the cars were very heavily laden with everything we needed for 4 people for 2 weeks. I think that's about the longest we stayed on the trip, including camping equipment. So they were pulling quite a load for the 1,700 and some odd miles up through the mountains. I had a flat tire on the right front. It blew the rim off when the rim cut. That's my brother Arnold in that 23 Maxwell. Probably putting oil in it. It's about the worst thing that happened to it. Other than later you'll see when I had to fix the oil pump. The model, my 13T, I don't believe I did anything to it except that tire. I believe that was the whole problem, the whole 1,700 miles. The Model B, the 4-cylinder, was a very nice car to start with, and I don't think he had to do a thing to it. I don't think he raised the hood. Walt Winters and his 2 kids and wife. Apparently we ate outdoors in some motel. We stayed in motels all the way. And ate in restaurants. Auto Museum, somewhere in New York, as I remember it. It was a pretty good one. I don't. Probably none of these are still there. This trip was taken, as I said, in 1960 by the maybe Richmond and us decided to do it, and I can't tell you why. We just did it, and the other 2 went along. And right now, I'm narrating this thing, and 50 years later, in the spring of 2010. So maybe the memory isn't as good as it should be, but still there. We had restored Richmond's car to quite extensively, so it ran all right. But my 13, we didn't do a darn thing to it. I just drove it. I didn't even prep that thing other than to check the gas and oil in it before I left home. Didn't get a chance. I worked on the Maxwell the whole time to make it go. Maxwell was done nicely. There really wasn't too much wrong with them. It was little small stuff. You see how we're carrying heavy stuff for the trip. We told our kids we'd stay one night camping somewhere, so we all had a tent with us, and I had it thrown in beside the hood and various places. So they were well prepared. We all were, hopefully. Kids thought that used tire was pretty good up in upstate New York somewhere. Dennis and Dougie, our two boys. Looks like the tube. We were somewhere, I believe it was Canandaigua, New York, but I couldn't be wrong on that. It looked more like something bigger than that. But we were up in going through into Canada, or out of Canada, into Canada on the Buffalo side. Went over to the falls, and then we went straight across Canada all the way had a decent dual highway then in Canada, called the Kings and Queens Highway, I believe. Very nice, all the way into Windsor, Ontario, and then across into Detroit. But there's pictures of the falls again. We stopped right beside the falls when nobody was parked, and I thought, gee, what a place. Nobody parks here. We can sit in our car and watch the falls. All of a sudden, one big splash came and filled my car up full of water right there. That's why nobody parked there. Maid of the Mist. The Canadian side of the falls was the place to be. The American side, there wasn't much in it, hardly anything. But the Canadians, they did it up well, tourist-wise. While we were there, some kid went over the falls, just got washed over, and hit the bottom from, I don't know how high the falls was, the main horseshoe. Hit the bottom and lived. They fished her out. She lived, one of the few people that ever did that. She didn't intend to go over the top, but did. Prior to that, a fellow went over, they told us a week or so before, in a barrel, specially made, specially insulated, special everything, and died. So a young girl went over. I think she didn't get hurt at all, I guess. Looks like quite a ride down it, anyhow. Apparently some hotel at the other side in the Canadian side, I don't know. 50 years later, I don't know. But there were the 4 cars that we went in anyhow. $1960. That's the kind of stuff that come up and hit you right and fill your car up once in a while. We found 4 tires for that Maxwell. I did in a little mom and pop store in the cellar, and put them on, put a Model T tubes in them, blew them up. They'd been down in the cellar of the store probably for 30 years in, and put them on the car and drove them to Michigan and back. In fact, I guess they're still in the car now, I don't know. That was one of the attractions, across the falls in a cable car. Below the falls. we took these, Martha Richmond and I each had an 8mm 50-foot reel movie camera, and we took pictures. Both of us took pictures. So when we got back, I took all the little 50-footers, and we didn't particularly narrate them, but I took all of individual, got a unit, and I put them all together, and we got about roughly 400 feet of film that we both took. So who knows who took what? Between the two of us, I took them at the Clock of Flowers, and then we had all the 50-footers, and I put them all together, and we decided, just recently in 2010, that the film was going to go bad, and it was going bad. So our grandson Timmy, took and converted it all to DVD, and so to preserve it a little longer anyhow. And I volunteered to narrate this thing the best I could 50, 60 years later. Looks like I had a flat tire in the back. These Model Ts and these cars were all standard. They had coils in them, and bands. There were no auxiliary 39 cents for a 5-quart gallon. These cars were standard as far as I know. Remember, they were not hopped up in any way. They were still, the Model Ts were still 20 horse, and they were still timers and the whole works on it. I may have had a 2-speed axle in mine at that time. I don't remember when I put it in. But all these cars, none of them were jazzed up in any way as far as power went. I said that Model B, the 32, was a good car. It had never been restored as I know of. It just was that way, kept well. The rest of them were all pretty well beat up when we started on them. Kings Highway, I guess that's what it's called, Route 2, yeah. Pina. 5 quarts to a imperial gallon, 39 cents. It says, that's what it said on the sign anyhow. Well, I think this is where we had to drain there it is. See the puddle? Well, the Maxwell lost its oil pressure. And the reason it did, the relief valve spring broke to hold the pressure up. It's about the size of a coil spring on a screen door. And without that, we had no oil pressure. So beside the road, in order to take the oil pump out of the pan, you had to take the oil pump came out without taking the pan down, but you had to take all the bolts out of the pump and pull it down. So I went up on a house that was right next to us, and I asked the person if I could buy the spring off of his storm door. He had a wooden screen door. He had a wooden screen door that had a little spring on it that pulled it shut and slam bang every time he went in and out. So he said, yeah, I think I gave him a quarter, I don't know. But I just took the spring, I cut about 2.5 inches off of it, and put another hook in the end of it and gave it back to him, hung it on his door again. He didn't know would never know the difference going in and out. And I put that piece of that screen door spring in the pump, and we had too much pressure, but didn't hurt anything. Pressure ran high. Instead of 20 pounds, it ran probably 30 or 40. But we ran still in there as far as I know. We ran the rest of the trip with it, I think. On the guy's 25-cent spring on his screen door that he got back to for himself. We're going along over somewhere and going into back into the United States. I think that's what we're doing here. Going over the bridge, Windsor Bridge into the United States. Or is that the inside of the Ford Museum. We're pretty close back into Detroit anyhow. Yeah, we are. This is where Henry Ford's house was. He made the, yep, they made the museum around his original house, including Bagley Avenue and where the first Fords were built, when he built the one in the garage. When he got it built, Clinton in, got it built in the garage, and once he got it made, he couldn't get it out. It take the brick building, as it showed a picture. It had to take the wall down to get his car out of the garage. But it ran back in the 1890s. Car show on the front. The first time I ever saw, and the last time I ever saw, a front-wheel drive Packard. One of those cars that's got a front drive in it. 32, 33 somewhere. But it was a Packard. I looked it over carefully. They even had the original river in there with a steamer running it. Paddle wheel, 2 cylinders, either 2 exhaust pipes. They give you a ride through in a horse and wagon through the village if you wanted it. They even had Model Ts running. You could go in a Model T, which we didn't. We drove a Model T up to it. The village green of Henry Ford's home, that he spent all his money restoring it and making a tourist attraction out of it. Those little people up there hammered. They're doing it now. They hammered the clock, time on the clock. It was done with a hammer and a mallet on the hour or half hour. That's Bagley Avenue. Now we're getting down to where he built his first Ford in his garage, 1896. And there it is, the brick building in his backyard. There's the door. He had to pull the whole side out to get his car out of it. Then it would just about run, but 1896, and he built it up, cylinders and everything from nothing but memory or ingenuity. Quite a layout. This is the barn where all the horses are kept for these tourist affairs. My Model T, the 13, was according to the history books, was the first Model T to be made at the Highland plant. In other words, it was the first one they had made on a conveyor belt. It was pulled through and on the conveyor belt in pieces, assembly line we'll call it. And the 13 was the first ones that went through there. Prior to that, they were all put together by hand. There's a rotunda, a very nice place in there on Ford's, but soon after we left there, this place burned down, accidentally. Don't know if they ever rebuilt it or not. Big theater on the salute to Hawaii, it says. We stayed out near the old Briggs Stadium, and we drove the Model T and the Model Bs into this thing here, right there in that motel. We drove the Model Bs in. We left the Fords into the museum, just drove right inside, but we didn't bring the Maxwell. We figured maybe we should stick with the Fords if we get in there. Maybe we get in for nothing. I don't remember now, but due to the fact we'd driven these Fords out from Massachusetts. So I think now we're leaving Michigan and headed back down Michigan Avenue to Detroit. We went to Detroit, got on a boat, a overnight steamship, or a type of ship you live on, had berths on it. There it is. We drove down to the dock, and I'd made arrangements to go from Detroit docks and take the cars in the hole and drove it down Lake Michigan to the Cleveland, Ohio, with the cars in the hole tied down. So we drove in and shackled them down with chains and went upstairs and enjoyed an overnight trip. I think it was to Detroit, from Detroit to Cleveland. We got there and the kids were riding on their first passenger excursion ship. Had everything on it to keep us occupied till nighttime. Then we went in, and I think we went to bed. I don't remember. I must have. That was Dennis and Dougie going out the canal out into. When we got out into the part of Lake Michigan out of Detroit, you see there's leaving Detroit. We got out in the ocean water. It looked like the ocean. It looked like you couldn't see land, but it was Lake Erie. I don't know what Arnold's looking at now. But we went into Cleveland and got out of the ship very early in the morning, like 1 o'clock, midnight. And of course I have gas lights on mine, acetylene headlights, and we got off the ship. When I drove out, they told me not to light the lights until I got out on the dock. So I pulled out on the dock and we drove from, I don't know what time, but midnight or better, to Euclid, Ohio, and found those cabins in the dark at 1 or 2 in the morning. Cops went by and wondered where the parade of antique cars was going at 2 in the morning. Had a bullhorn asked us what we were doing there. Nothing wrong, just asked us. So this went into the hills of Pennsylvania on the way home. We had planned to stop and go camping. We had the tents with us and had everything, and we did. We went into, there we are, we went into this national park or whatever it was. It was listed on a map. And we spent overnight there amongst the animals, the bears, whatever it was, to campfire. Arnold, my brother, was the only one that didn't have a tent. He slept on top. I think he slept on top of the picnic table, wrapped up in something, and I think he stared at either a raccoon or a skunk in the middle of the night, but didn't bother us any. There's some of the roads into the camp. The cliffs are pretty steep. In fact, there was an oil truck down to the bottom of one of them. I've been there for several years, laying on its side. Pretty steep. You went down them in low gear. Of course, we didn't have any brakes, just transmission brakes and so forth. There were no hydraulics. There were not even band brakes. Max was the only one that had band brakes on the rear wheels only. The Model B had it on 4 wheels, but no hydraulics. You just had to hope the bands held out or keep it in low gear all the way down, which we did. Well, I must have found some place to stay double-decker. Went across Pennsylvania anyhow and all the way into New York State. Consider it was 1960, considering the fact that you couldn't buy any parts anywhere, hardly. They were nothing like we have in later years where somebody was Japanese or Chinese were making parts for them. They didn't. Any part we got for those cars had to be out of someone's garage that they hadn't thrown them away yet. After we crossed the state of New York on the way home, we went to, this could have been the approach to Bear Mountain Bridge, I don't know, I think it was. We had to cross the Hudson River, and then follow the coastline of New York up south till we hit Connecticut. And because we had no superhighways then, you had to pick your own, whatever the road was that went a most direct route. I think that was the Hudson. You'll see it someplace. You'll see us going up quite a hill on a bridge. It's a good-sized bridge.
It's like the Newburgh-Brighton Bridge.
Well, it said Bear Mountains. I think it was in Newburgh, but there's the side how it went up the mountain. Uneventful, but picturesque. Low speed all the way up some of them, but it did it. Loading all, people, 2 weeks supply of everything. I think I could be wrong. I think we pulled into Middletown, Connecticut. Don't know why, but just happened to be there. Cars were still running fine. In fact, they seemed to run better as time went on. I think we got them broken in. They could have, I don't know what that is. That's how they turned the bridge to let the boats through. They weren't high enough to clear some of the big ocean-going ships that went up the Hudson. I'm looking at Art's car and it's boiling. I believe this is where we were in Providence. It got a little too hot. Now see the pan, an aluminum pan? Well, his wife, we didn't have any water, so his wife went down to there it is, one of the canals, and ran down to the edge of the shore and brought back pan after pan of that to fill up his Model T, and that was in Providence, Rhode Island. On the way home, and from there on, nothing to Middleborough.